Excellent. Welcome to What's Real with Adrien livestream, where I like to take the conversation a little bit deeper. And today we're going to be talking about stories, your story, my story, and trying to understand how to decipher the facts from the fiction of the stories that we carry around with us. You know, I woke up this morning kind of preparing myself for this talk and everything else I had going on. And I have to confess, it was with a heavy heart that I came to this subject matter where I'm thinking about sharing this subject with you right now. Because in the environment in which I'm now speaking, we're dealing with some pretty serious and intense situations here in the United States. And I hesitated, actually. You know, I'd already planned this, but I hesitated because I'm not sure it was the proper conditions or environment to talk about this subject, which was a subject I picked a while ago, obviously. But then I decided to go forth because I have faith in you. I have faith in you watching. And I hope that you'll understand the power of what I'm trying to share with you and how it actually is very applicable to what's going on. But as I'm going to start talking, I'm going to kind of stick to the original plan, the original talk I had, which didn't have anything to do with George Floyd and all the things going on. But I will take it there if you'll be patient with me, and we'll see if we can't find something there of great value. I believe it exists. So I'm excited about sharing this. I'm a little, like I said, heavy-hearted too, because this is a pretty intense, this kind of ups the ante of my conversation that I'm trying to have with you today. So, stories. We all have them, right? Whether it's I grew up in a tough part of town, or I grew up white, or I grew up black, this would be very relevant to talk about right now, or I grew up poor, or I was in a very good position, all these things. You know, I finished school, I didn't finish school, I got married, I did all these things. They come to be our story, right? And this story is plays a very powerful role in how we experience life. You could probably already start to see how this is going to be relevant in the situation, but again, I want to hold off on that. You know, in a live stream I did a little while ago, I talked about the filter that we put on life, that as life is coming in through us, we're filtering out things through our perspective, through our thoughts and emotions and desires. This filters out certain parts of reality. Well, another way of saying that is that's what our story does. Our story is sort of the filter. It's just like the big picture of it in a weird way, right? It's everything that we're carrying around with us that affects, again, our experience of reality. Now, there's no great revelation there, right? I think we all know that. So in order to take this conversation a little deeper, the first place I'm going to go is to point out this, that all thinking happens in stories. Whenever you think, you're thinking in the context of a story, whether you're aware of it or not, which is one of the reasons I bring it up, because it's a very important thing to realize, especially as we go on with this conversation. You're going to see how it's connected, I think, and how important this is to realize. When we think, like, you know, I was thinking, you know, when we think of an apple, we don't just think of an apple floating out in space, right? There's some sort of context to it. This is part of what stories provides, too, right? It provides context. It gives us a sense of security, too, by the way, but I kind of jump in the gun. It gives us some context. So when we think of apple, it's like, oh, I love apples. Oh, I hate apples. Oh, I only like these kinds of apples, right? I love my grandma's apple pie. Whatever that is, there's some context. You're not just thinking about an apple. That never happens, or just about never happens, right? It's in some sort of context. All thinking goes in this way. Now, I'm going to share a story. It seems kind of trivial and trite in lieu of everything that's going on, but please, again, stay with me. Sometimes it's good to have two extremes here. We'll see the easy, light one, and then we can get into a more intense conversation here. But I was mowing the lawn, and that's actually when I came up with the idea of having this conversation with you right now. And in order for me to tell you the story of me mowing the lawn, I have to give you some backstory, right? I mean, this is context. All good stories have to have backstory. That's what makes some stories, right? So the first thing I would share with you is the fact that, whether you know me or not, I was a general contractor for the majority of my adult life. So in general contracting, the saying, you got to make hay when the sun shines, is very, very relevant there. I mean, especially where I live, because I live in upstate New York. It's a short season, summertime, right? And it tends to be the busiest time for most of us contractors. And not only that, I mean, what I do for a living what I did for a living is very difficult work. It's a lot of times very physical, and of course it's summertime, it's very hot. This is all part of a backstory that I want to share with you. The next thing I got to share with you is that my wife and I kind of have an ongoing conversation, you might say, discussion, little poking at each other about. My wife is not a real big fan of winter. And I don't even think it's not that she doesn't like winter, but she doesn't like being cold, right? So wintertime provides that a lot of opportunities for her to feel cold, obviously, and it's not her favorite season. And there's been much discussion. I mean, she'll even poke at me a lot, like, oh, Florida's pretty nice and all that kind of stuff, as a joking around about it. But in that conversation, I'll try to say to her, like, look, I love winter. Now, it doesn't mean I don't love summer. By the way, even with the story I said, I do love summer, but it comes with that context, that story for me, right? This whole working hard. And so I try to share with her, like, well, for me, for winter, I think of sitting by the wood stove, beautiful white snowflakes falling from the sky, watching television or reading a book, relaxing, right? That's kind of my connotation. That's my story. When I think of winter, that's what I think of, beautiful, pristine scenery, and a little more, days are shorter. You can see it, right? So now we got to go back. We're going to get one more little bit of backstory, and then we'll get to why I'm sharing all this. So it wasn't very long ago here. The season's breaking here now. And the end of last season, our lawnmower broke. So I wasn't able to start this season by just cutting the grass. I had to fix the mower. So I spent 3 hours doing that, replacing all these parts and doing all, everything you got to do. And I have to also say that we have a decent sized property. So mowing grass is, an acre and a half, 2 acres of mowing. So having a riding lawnmower is pretty awesome and pretty wonderful. I fix the mower, I go to take it out for the test drive, and something's still broken. Now, of course, I don't have the part. There's nothing I can do about it. The grass is long. So I grab the push mower, and I'm out there mowing my grass by pushing it. Now we start into the story that I want to share with you, where I came up with this conversation that we're trying to have. So I'm mowing my grass, and as I'm doing that, I start paying attention to my thinking. Now, this is something that I do because of the practice, because of the work I do now, if you want to call it that, right? Trying to share these deep spiritual things, is because I've paid a great deal of attention to my inner world. So there I am mowing the grass. It's probably 85, 87 degrees outside. Sun's shining. And I start paying attention to the thoughts going through my head. Now, the thoughts are all of this backstory, right? I start thinking about, I'm going to tell my wife, this is why I'm not always such a fan of summer, because this is what it means to me. Like, all this work, I got lots of things to do, and here I am working on the mower for hours, and then it doesn't work, and now I'm push mowing. The whole thing starts going, and I'm watching this. And for the first little while, it was actually just entertaining. I'm paying attention to myself and kind of chuckling almost. I'm thinking about sharing this with my wife. And then all of a sudden, I notice an energetic shift in me. I started noticing that these stories carried a certain energy to them. And they were one of irritation, frustration, right? I started thinking more about, like, God, I have so many things to do, and this is going to take me twice, 3 times as long to mow the grass now, blah, 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 the list of why couldn't it just work? Why am I out here push mowing, And as soon as, this is the beauty of doing inner work, and what I really, in a weird way, the crux of what I want to share with you, right? Paying attention to this sort of stuff can change your life. Because once I started to notice that, an alarm went off, so to speak, right? I know better. I know that I'm telling myself stories. And if I don't be careful, these stories are going to lead me down a path then I'm not going to enjoy very much. Why? How do I know this, by the way? Because I've gone down there plenty, right? So with that awareness, I was able to set down my story. And when I did that, what happened? Well, it was actually really quite miraculous because I realized, whoa, reel it in, mister. You're walking around on your beautiful property on a beautiful day, smelling the smell of fresh cut grass. I mean, what's the problem? There is no problem. But if I wasn't careful and I went on with that story, I could have created a lot of problems. I know in the past, that could have set me off. Believe it or not, I don't know if you can relate to this. Believe it or not, that could have set me off for days. Because I could have got myself in a really bad spot, got really grumpy. Next thing you know, I'm turning into drinking, or there's a million other things I could have done wrong because I'm all worked up. This is the beauty of realizing, though, some of the things that I want to share with you today. Okay? Now, this is a simple example, and I will get to things like George Floyd, believe it or not. And I don't mean to compare these two, but there are things that we can extract some meaning from it, okay? So the first thing we got to realize is that we all carry a story, right? We already said that. That's not a great revelation. The second thing is that we think in these terms. We think in stories. Whenever we're thinking, there's a story following along with it. The next thing is to try to discern which part of the story is fact and which part is fiction. And I got really good news for you when it comes to this. It's actually very simple to figure this out. The only thing is it's kind of good, bad news. And the good news is I can tell you, and that it's simple. The bad news is you might not want to hear it, and you might not be ready to hear it. It's part of why I hesitated to talk about this today, because when I say this, there may be a gut reaction that doesn't sit with you well. I pray that you'll stay with me and open your heart and your mind to hear it, because it's incredibly important. It's incredibly important. So how do we decipher fact from fiction in the stories of our lives, in the stories that we tell? All stories are fiction. All stories are fiction. Now, that could be taken the wrong way, because that doesn't mean that there's nothing true about the story. I thought about the best way I could try to explain this would be almost like that disclaimer that goes in the beginning of a movie, right? Where it says, this movie is based on fact, right? But we know that that means that there's probably lots of stuff that we don't even know, right? We don't even know which parts sometimes. I know for me personally, it's kind of frustrating. I'm like, well, gosh, I wonder, is that part true? Because that's crazy, that kind of thing. But so that's sort of like that. When I say that all stories are fiction, it doesn't mean that there's nothing true about the story. It just means that a story in and of itself is not the truth and cannot be the truth. This comes back to thinking too. Let's go back to my example. This is because it's much easier, right? This is a little lighter of a subject. Let's go back to the example of me mowing the grass and starting to tell my story and getting wrapped up in my story. Let's imagine if I didn't stop it and I got wrapped up in it, right? I am entertaining, I am building, I am holding on to a story that no longer exists. That's why when I set it down, it was a completely different reality for me in that situation, right? All of a sudden, I realized, God, and it almost felt like that too. It was kind of like a, whoa, it's a beautiful day. Where are you going? Why would you go there? That was pretty much the revelation for that. But that's because the fiction is that I'm not fixing my mower anymore. I'm not working hard in the summertime on my contracting job, right? It's not winter. I'm not sitting there in my comfy chair. None of this is real. None of this is now. And that makes it fiction. Now again, there's reasons that I was there that have to do with the story, right? That has to do with the past. But in that moment, if I'm carrying those stories with me, they're not true. Especially if I'm really getting lost, especially, this would be probably the most important thing that I'd like to share with you, when I don't realize that they're only a story and that there's more in this moment than any story could ever encapsulate. This leads me to where we are right now, meaning the situation and the things that we're struggling with in this country. We all have stories, and it doesn't mean that they're not true. But if we don't recognize them for what they are, they control us. That's the thing about me doing. If I'm mowing the grass like that, I'm limiting myself. The more I tell myself my stories about that, the more I was limiting my ability to actually experience what was going on right then. Now, in that situation, everything was fine. I'm not trying to say everything is always fine. What I am trying to say, though, is that if you're holding on to stories, you're not going to be able to deal with the present moment appropriately, honestly. The story of what's going on in this country is very old, and we know it. It's a very painful story. But if we're not willing to loosen our grip on that, and it doesn't matter which side of that story we're on, right? And right off the bat, right as soon as I say that, which side is also, we're immediately into a story, a problematic story, right? But that story is old. It's painful. It has its roots, like its ripple is still going on, right? It's like that ripple effect. What happened hundreds of years ago, we're still paying the cost for. We will never stop paying that cost if we can't realize that it's a story and set it down. If you want to honor that story, you need to learn how to set it down. Now, as a human being, this is very difficult because these stories hold a ton of context, right? A ton of emotion, a ton of very true facts from the past, right? Very true things going on right now. But if we don't let go of the story, we're never going to be able to move on from it. This is why it continues still to this day. Part of it is because of the size of the ripple, which is to say the atrocity, the size of the atrocity that was committed hundreds of years ago was such an enormously terrible thing that, of course, its energetic thing is still floating through. Of course. But it's also because we have not learned how to set down the story, to realize that it is a story, and that if we want to deal with this moment as it is, we're going to have to understand how to do that. This is part of what I'm always trying to share as far as dealing with your inner world. Dealing with your inner world will help you deal with this situation. Because if you don't understand your inner world, you don't understand what I'm talking about. You don't understand how to deal with these very painful moments. And what happens? Repetition, my friend. Repetition. History repeats itself. Because we don't know how to meet love, or hate, with love. You know, I feel very confident that if Martin Luther King was sitting here beside me right now, he'd be like, right on, brother. He would say, you better honor the story. You know, you better not be trying to sweep that under the rug, which I'm not trying to do. But at the same time, he would be saying, right on, brother. I know it. How do I know it? By some of the most famous quotes from him, right? If a person's enslaved in their mind, their body's never going to be free. If you don't set down the story, you're never going to be free. And I'm not talking to black people. I'm talking to all of us. You know, he said, I I take this decision of love because hate is too high of a cost, right? Hate will never be defeated by hate, only by love. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you don't start to work on your inner world, you're not going to understand how to do that at all. And if you don't understand how to do these things, and there's plenty more quotes, by the way, from Martin Luther King, you're not going to know how to change this situation. You're not contributing the way you think you are. If we want to shift things in this world, this is where we got to work. I'm not saying don't go out and protest. I'm not saying don't, make say your piece on social media, but make sure you're checking yourself. You have to love that victim, but you have to love that cop. That doesn't mean you forgive them, or I shouldn't even say that. It doesn't mean you let them go free and act like nothing happened. But you have to be able to find, how did a man get to that place? Now, I know I'm pushing it, but if we don't go here, repetition, my friend, repetition, we're not going to see a shift in our world, and we desperately need to see a shift in our world. People get so riled up by this, and I understand it. We can't stop it riled up, and we have to know what riled up means and how to deal with it and where to focus it properly. If you don't take some of this riled up energy and turn it inward and check yourself and check, can I do that? Can I just do that crazy freaking thing that Adrien just said? Can I love that cop too? Can I realize he's got a story? Obviously, his story is what led him to do that horrible thing. Can I set down my story enough to see this? If you can't do that, no amount of marching and posting is going to change anything. Because only love can conquer hate. And what does that mean, right? What does that mean in reality? Well, it's complicated. That part's true. The answer is simple, just like the answer to which stories are true and false. They're all false. That's simple. Understanding that, dealing with it, is challenging. Understanding what it means to love somebody like that cop is challenging. You got to do the work. If you don't do that work, nothing's going to change. I do all this stuff. I sit here like this, and I try to talk to people about whether you realize it or not. I'm always talking about this. I'm always talking about the fundamentals, the things that make us do is what we do as human beings. If you don't address this level of things, you're not going to change anything. It doesn't matter which side you're on, by the way. If you can't step outside of your side, if you can't set your story down and and be willing to look at that other person and put yourself in their shoes, you're going to repeat the same problems, the same stories. Because you're holding on to your story. That story hasn't changed. That story is fiction. Deal with the present moment right here. What does that mean? What does that mean right now? It's different than it was 2 seconds ago. You do this to the best of your ability, by the way. This isn't like, a judgment. But if you're not taking on this work, that's what I was going to say. I offer all kinds of stuff. A lot of it is free. Do you know how few people actually take it up? Take me up on the offer of learning about how to deal with your inner world? Very few. That needs to change. And I'm not talking about my stuff. I'm just saying, taking the effort, putting in the time to do this inner work, it means everything. This is the way to change things. Again, it doesn't mean don't protest. It doesn't mean don't do your posting. It doesn't mean, it means you have to see the truth. And the truth is living here right now. Not in a story. And if you want to honor the story, you need to see that fact. If you act from that place, you'll have a different story. Now, it's not going to happen right away. That's the other thing. Let me say that really quick, and then I'm going to wrap this up. This is the fact, right? This is more inner work, though. The fact that we can't stick to things as human beings, that we can't wait to see the results pay off, is part of our inner work. We need to exercise that muscle. This isn't going to change overnight. And just because we see something like this happening, it doesn't mean things aren't changing. Have some faith in your fellow man. I know there's lots of bad stuff going on and people act terribly. It doesn't mean, actually, though, that they're all terrible people. I know I've acted terribly many times. I've never done anything like that, of course, but I have done some pretty terrible things that I'm ashamed of in my life. That helps me have empathy. I want to end this by saying, I love you, whoever you are. And I hope that you'll take some of these things that I said seriously and to heart. If you want to change the world, if you want to contribute in a positive way to the world, learn your story and then learn how to set it down. Learn what it means to honor a story. We think that means holding on to it so tightly. It's not true. Holding on to stories is what gets us where we are. As always, I thank you for your time. It's precious.